There are a couple of things that are rare in the Naruto universe. A well-written female character, an anime arc running its entire manga course without having a filler arc jammed in the middle of it, and a happy backstory. But of those three things, the rarest by far is a character having a happy backstory. See, because while there is absolutely characters in the Naruto universe who have happy backstories and live regular lives, like Sakura, Shino, Kiba, people who were raised by their parents and have never lost anybody even remotely important to them. But as a story, Naruto doesn't tend to focus on these happy backstories, mostly because they're just not all that interesting. I mean, we got like half a filler episode about Sakura's family, and even that was too much. And it's kind of hard to give exposition to Shino's family when they're all kind of weird copies of him, except they have more, I have a present in my backpack for the entire school energy that he does. And while we sure occasionally get to look into Kiba's family and its dynamics and how he was raised, that's only because their character design is based off Princess Mononoke and is therefore incredibly sick, and they all have really big dogs. And who doesn't love dogs? But because of Naruto as a story's reluctance to go into the good backstories, it's pretty much a guarantee anytime you're either reading or watching Naruto that if you're hearing about somebody's past, it's usually not for the better. And because of this, Naruto has a gigantic cast of tragic characters. And because of this, one of the biggest talking points revolving in the Naruto fandom is who has the saddest backstory. And there really is no universal consensus. Some people believe it's Itachi, others Sasuke, some people believe it's Gaara, while others believe it's Kakashi. And this is pretty easily explainable. I mean, you can't power scale sadness. Having a sad backstory is inherently subjective, so it's going to be hard to find an objective answer to who has the saddest one. And thus, the jury of the Naruto fandom has been split, and probably will stay split for a long time. Or at least I should have said, would have stayed split if we weren't making this video today. Because in this channel, we don't believe in subjective answers. On this channel, we give objective answers to subjective questions. Because today, like a bunch of 14-year-old emo kids trying to one-up each other, we're gonna be power ranking sadness so that we can truly, once and for all, crown the king of despair, or queen. There's one woman on this list, because today we're talking the top 10 saddest backstories in Naruto, ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me ranking things from your favorite anime and manga, pop on over to my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. And if you just love hearing me talk about anime and manga, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So, how do we figure out who has the true saddest backstory in all of Naruto? Well, in actuality, it's not that tough. See, because while yes, the concept of sadness is subjective to every single person, and every single person's gonna have a differing opinion on how sad an individual backstory is based off their own real life experiences. That is to say that the more somebody individually resonates with some character and therefore their backstory, the sadder they're gonna believe it is. Today, we're gonna be trying to take emotion out of the video about emotion. That is to say that I'm going to look at the characters that I believe objectively have the saddest backstories in all of Naruto and try to remove my own emotions from that equation. And then by looking at things like amount of people lost, how they were lost, and how they had to live their lives, we will truly, finally get an answer to who had the saddest backstory in all of Naruto. Because really, the only other way I could go about this video is by being like, oh, Tsunade, sad, and then I'd have to be like 8th place. That's reminded me, there's 2 women on this list. So today, ladies and gentlemen, like a pop punk band trying to write a catchy summer song, today we're gonna try to quantify sadness. And in this story, there's a whole lot to quantify, but maybe not as much as people think. Because coming up in our number 10 spot, we have somebody who a lot of people talk about as having one of the saddest backstories in anime, and genuinely, I just don't buy it. Because coming up at number 10, we have Obito.
Oh, Nick, what do you mean? Obito's got a devastating backstory. How's he at number 10?
Does he? Does he have a devastating backstory? Here's the thing. Sadness is something that's imposed onto you, not that you impose upon yourself, at least in the way that we're going to be quantifying it today. Because, well, yes, Obito played a massive role in the Uchiha massacre. He did it because he wanted to. That's made even worse by the fact that Obito was the person who killed all of the non-combatants in the Uchiha massacre. Non-fighting women, children, all killed by Obito, while Itachi went around killing the combatants. But the situation and the context for both Obito and Itachi in the scenario is not only massively different because of who they killed, but also because of why they were killing. Itachi participated in the Uchiha massacre because it was the only way he believed he could save Sasuke. Obito participated in the Uchiha massacre because Itachi asked. And here's the thing, there's a fair chance that Obito killed his own family on the night of the Uchiha Massacre just because he was asked to. So you cannot weigh participation in the Uchiha Massacre with the same level of sadness for Obito as you do Itachi. No, really when it comes down to it, the only two sad things that you can genuinely glean from Obito's backstory are the fact that A, he tried to give his life to protect Kakashi, and B, he had to watch Rin die at the hands of the person he gave his life to protect. So, tough scenario, but that's basically it when it comes down to sadness in Obito's backstory. Sure, you could say that Obito being manipulated by Madara to see Kakashi kill Rin is sad in itself, and the fact that Obito was brainwashed by one of the most powerful and evil men in all of history to pick up his mantle and try and take over the entire world is also sad, but it's more unfortunate than it is sad, because Obito made the active decision throughout his entire life to not go back to Konoha and not be like, hey, I'm alive, Kakashi, why'd you kill Rin? Madara was not around for the majority of Obito's life, and yet he continually made the conscious decision to continue being evil. So it's very hard for me to look at his descent into villainy as anything even remotely resembling sad. Now, is he an interesting character? Absolutely. Is his descent into villainy about more than just Rin's death? Also, yes, absolutely. But that's not sad. It's compelling, if anything. So for being a child soldier who put his life on the line for another child soldier who ended up killing the love of his life, he's getting 10th place. I just can't give him anything higher than that. But speaking of crucial members of the Akatsuki, coming up in 9th place, we have Nagato.
Oh my god, Nick, another devastating backstory put so low on the list. Why is Nagato so low?
Listen, Nagato's backstory is absolutely devastating. He's just incredibly not alone in the experiences he went through. Yeah, Nagato was orphaned by war. So was Iruka, and he's not on this list. Hell, so was Kabuto and Kimimaru. Kakashi, Sasuke, Sasori. So many people have been orphaned from war. Now, you can say the circumstances of Nagato becoming an orphan were worse than for these other people, and I would tend to agree, as Nagato had to watch his parents get killed by Konoha Shinobi, which is made doubly worse by the fact that they were non-combatants, and even worse by the fact that they were doctors. But Nagato's not even an orphan for all that long. He gets orphaned in the Second Great Shinobi World War, and then he basically gets adopted by Jiraiya at the end of said war. Now, any preteen being orphaned in a destroyed nation because two larger nations wanted to battle and their smaller nation happened to be between them, and therefore the perfect battlefield, isn't great. But Nagato did have Yahiko and Konan before he even had Jiraiya. And then he had Jiraiya, who was an incredible father figure to the three of them and trained them all to be incredibly capable ninja. At which point Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan built an organization called the Akatsuki, built out of all of their friends, that for a matter of years inflicted real actual change on the world. Now, obviously, Hanzo and Danzo eventually stick their grubby little fingers into the Akatsuki, and that leads to Yahiko's death, technically at the hands of Nagato, which then sends Nagato into a downward spiral where he reaches out to Obito and basically allows for Obito to take over the Akatsuki, with him now directing the entirety of the effort of the Akatsuki towards the Eye of the Moon plan. And it's at this point that Nagato goes around and collects 6 corpses of his friends and turns them into the 6 paths of pain, which he then uses to inflict his pain on the rest of the world until Naruto talks him into joining Kurt Cobain. And that is sad. Watching your own parents get killed in front of you is devastating. Having to be the person who stabbed Yahiko even though he just threw himself onto the kunai in your hands is devastating. And if you want to make the argument that the 6 people that Nagato later used for the 6 paths of pain were people that were close to him, that implies that at least 5 more people outside of Yahiko's the Devapath died in Nagato's life that he loved. But we don't know the level of connection that Nagato had to those 5 other people. Sure, Jiraiya in his battle against the 6 paths of pain is able to recognize these 6 bodies, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all 6 of these people were Yahiko level close to Nagato. So really what it boils down to is Nagato lost his parents and Yahiko, after which he was placed into a similar situation as Obito. Instead of being manipulated by Madara, he was being manipulated by Obito, at which point Nagato descended into villainy. And once again, in the same circumstance of Obito, I would say this is more unfortunate than it is sad, because here's the thing. After the death of Yahiko, Nagato got to live on for years doing what he believed was right. So much so that he killed Jiraiya, the person who raised him. And before any of you go,
Oh, that must have been sad for Nagato and Konan to kill Jiraiya.
no, Nagato and Konan, but mostly Nagato at this point in the story, were so wrapped in the idea of what they believed was correct that killing Jiraiya was simply just a task to be done, as he was a representative of the thing they hated most: Konoha and the ninja world. Well, of course, they didn't exactly know why Jiraiya left them, and therefore they assumed he ditched them. In a lot of the backstory we're given for Nagato, even after Jiraiya has gone away, talks about the idea of going to visit Jiraiya rather fondly. So am I willing to say that Nagato killing Jiraiya was a sad moment for him? No, but for sure, a sad backstory. But not as sad as one of the first ever people from outside of Konoha we were introduced to's backstory. Because coming in at number 8 with a sadder backstory than Nagato, and yes, this is gonna get controversial real quick, we have Haku. Yeah, I believe Haku's backstory is objectively sadder than Nagato's. See, Haku comes from a small village in the Land of Water, where occasionally somebody with an ice-release Kekkei Genkai is born. But in this village, anybody with a Kekkei Genkai was treated as less than human. Anybody who was found to have a Kekkei Genkai would be killed immediately. Now, Haku and Haku's mother were born with this ice-release Kekkei Genkai, and thus Haku's mother kept this Kekkei Genkai from her husband. One day, he eventually found out, and when he found out, he gathered a mob to kill not only his wife, but his son. Now, Haku, after watching his mother die at the hands of his father and this mob, then has to go on to kill his own father and the rest of the people in his village that were all coming to kill him because of how he was born, leaving Haku an orphan in a much worse way, in my eyes, than how Nagato ended up as an orphan. See, because both Nagato and Haku had to watch their parents die, but only one of them had to have a hand in it. This left Haku an orphan on the streets, who would eventually end up adopted by Zabuza, a supposedly bloodthirsty assassin who raised him to be an Anbu level threat. And Haku and Zabuza adventure around the world together for at least a couple of years. That is until the newly formed Team 7 blows into their corner of the world, where Haku is killed by Kakashi while trying to protect Zabuza, the one person who truly mattered in his life, who didn't even realize he cared about Haku until Naruto yelled at him about it. And sure, you can make the argument that Haku knew that Zabuza cared about him, but by the time that Zabuza is able to get over to Haku's body so that he can die, Haku's long gone. A 15-year-old boy protecting the demon of the mist. Gone before he can even hear Zabuza say that he wants to go wherever Haku is gone. I'm sorry, that's just worse than Nagato's story, because Haku was too young to know whether or not what they were doing was correct. And while Nagato technically gave his life to revive Konoha, he's the one who killed Konoha first. It's not sad, it's a net neutral. So yeah, I think Haku's backstory is sadder than Nagato's. String me up. But since we're talking about pretty people with long hair, let's move on to our number 7 spot, which is Tsunade. This is where the real heavy hitters start. And honestly, if you wanted to put Tsunade higher on this list, I wouldn't blame you, because Tsunade's backstory is so devastating, she genuinely believes she's cursed. Tsunade's younger brother tells her about how he wants to become the Hokage one day, just like their grandfather. And Tsunade's like, yeah, you can absolutely do that. Here, take our grandfather's necklace. It'll help you become Hokage. The kid dies 12 hours later on a mission Genin genuinely shouldn't have been on in the first place. And because there was no medical ninja around to make sure that Nawaki, her younger brother, didn't die in the field, Tsunade then pleads with Hiruzen to make sure that every single 3-man ninja team includes a medical ninjutsu specialist. And it's while doing this that she meets Dan Kato, her soon-to-be lover. And for a little while, things are fine. In fact, Konoha's ninja efficiency is as high as it's ever been. Tsunade's pleading has instilled actual historic change into Konoha. That is until, of course, Dan decided to open his big stupid mouth, telling Tsunade that he also wants to become Hokage. So Tsunade says, well, surely this can't happen twice, and decides to give Dan her family necklace. And wouldn't you know it, it happens twice, as Dan is later fatally wounded in the same war that killed Nawaki, the Second Great Shinobi World War. And even though Tsunade is there and one of the world's forefront medical ninjutsu users, and also manages to heal all of Dan's wounds, he dies of extreme blood loss, leaving Tsunade now with a crippling case of hemophobia, also known as the fear of blood, which is not great if you want to be a field medic. But it doesn't end there. Sure, Tsunade lost her grandfather, who she loved in the First Great Shinobi World War. We don't know where her parents are. She lost her little brother in the Second Great Shinobi World War, and her lover in her own arms. But later, when she got over her hemophobia and became the 5th Hokage of Konoha, Jiraiya, the real actual love of her life, maybe, told her he wanted to go to the Hidden Rain Village, and told her he wanted to go alone, which she lets him do because he knows the Hidden Rain Village. He's one of the most powerful ninjas on Earth, and a 1-man crew is a lot harder to find than a 3- or 4-man crew. And what does Jiraiya do? Well, he goes off and dies. And thus now, Tsunade has not only lost her entire family, but also 2 possible lovers. Not to mention, she single-handedly had to watch as the entirety of the Konoha that she was supposed to protect as the 5th Hokage got destroyed by Nagato. And while she did as good a job as she possibly could have done in the battle against Nagato, she did have to lose basically her entire village. So yeah, when it comes down to saddest backstories, you can't have this conversation without Tsunade. But is Tsunade's backstory as sad as our number 6 entry? Because coming in at number 6, we have Sasori. See, Sasori may not have sustained as much loss as Tsunade, but the context for the entirety of Sasori's life is devastating. See, Sasori at an incredibly young age lost his parents to war, becoming an orphan. And while that in itself wouldn't be enough to put him that high on this list, he should technically be even lower on the list when you consider the fact that after the loss of his parents, he still had a grandmother around who was very much willing to raise him. And thus the extinguishment of his parents didn't mean that Sasori was entirely alone, something that is kind of rare amongst orphans on this list. However, even though Sasori was put in a slightly more advantageous situation than other orphans on this list, Sasori got incredibly lonely after the loss of his parents. So incredibly lonely that Granny Chiyo taught Sasori puppetry so that he would have at least some things around him, and thus the first puppets that Sasori ever made were puppets of his parents, which is devastating. In fact, one of the most devastating scenes in the entirety of Naruto, either as a manga or an anime, is Sasori controlling his two parent puppets to hug him. But what's even worse about that is that while Granny Chiyo did teach Sasori puppetry to make sure that he wouldn't be lonely anymore, Sasori went beyond the pale with it. See, Sasori did begin to feel companionship with his puppets, and thus Sasori became ever more obsessed with the idea of making human puppets. Because one, a human puppet can always be fixed, and two, they can't leave you. And thus when Sasori lost his best friend after they were accidentally poisoned, Sasori made his first ever human puppet, ensuring his best friend would never be able to leave him again. And thus Sasori would continue down this path, trying to turn humans into puppets so he could be surrounded by as many people as possible. This is why Sasori controls more puppets than anybody else. He counts them as friends, family. He doesn't feel alone because he has so many. And the amount of puppets that Sasori controls is meant to show us that he needs to feel as though he isn't alone anymore. This is especially encapsulated by the fact that Sasori turns himself into a puppet, ensuring that he never grows beyond that of the boy who lost his parents. And thus everything Sasori ever did was to try to be a little less lonely. And because of that, I find the context of what Sasori went through to be more devastating than anybody else on this list thus far. Especially when you consider the fact that Sasori had to be killed by his own grandmother, the one person left on Earth who truly had love for him. And he was killed by the first puppets he ever made, his mother and his father. That's devastating, it's poetic, and in my book, it's highly deserving of the number 6 spot. But we're not done with the Akatsuki yet, because coming in at number 5, we have Konan.
Oh, Nick, Nagato's number 9, but Konan's 5? Make it make sense.
Yeah. Okay, I'll make it make sense. Konan gets orphaned during the Second Great Shinobi World War, just like Nagato. While we don't know whether or not Konan had to watch her parents die and kill the people who killed her parents, she lost her parents to war, the same as Nagato. On top of that, while Nagato lost his best friend in Yahiko, Konan lost the love of her life. And whether or not you jive with this mentality, Konan was way more at fault for Yahiko's death than Nagato was. The only reason that Nagato and Yahiko were put in this situation is because Konan was kidnapped. And while you would never hear me saying that it was Konan's fault that Yahiko threw himself on Nagato's kunai, it would be hard not to believe that as the person in that situation. On top of that, Konan then had to watch Nagato descend into essentially madness. See, out of everybody in the Akatsuki, Konan believed in the mission the least. She basically just joined so she could keep Nagato safe, and so that she could lead over the Hidden Rain village. But not only did she have to watch Nagato descend into villainy, she had to watch him pick up the corpse of the love of her life and pilot it around like an Ava, making the body of Yahiko do vile and disgusting things like squishing an entire village. But the losses didn't end there for Konan, as Konan also had to watch the one person she had left in the world, Nagato, fade away as he gave all of the energy in his body back to Konoha. And thus Konan inherently had to deal with more loss than Nagato because Konan had to deal with the loss of Nagato. And if you've read Akatsuki Hiden, you'll know that Konan was never in love with Nagato. Their relationship was slightly akin to the relationship that Jiraiya had with Tsunade, where after the death of the person that Konan loved, there was a possibility of the door being opened to love between the two of them. And even after the loss of Nagato, Konan, somewhat misguidedly, but also incredibly considerately, decided to bring Nagato's body back to the Hidden Rain and protect it, as opposed to destroying it. And while destroying it would have been the correct thing to do, instead of making a billion paper bombs and trying to fight Obito, Konan was so sick of loss and watching her friends' bodies be misappropriated by the powers of evil of the world, wanted to give Nagato a proper send-off, something that Yahiko never got. And in the end, she wasn't able to do even that. Her backstory is easily more devastating than Nagato's, especially when you read Akatsuki Hiden and realize that she very desperately wanted a child but couldn't because she had gone barren, most likely to do with her paper body technique. Her story is rough. But not as rough as our number 4 spot, because coming in at number 4, we got Sasuke. No, he doesn't have the saddest story in Naruto. It's not a great one, but it's not the saddest. Sasuke gets a pretty normal childhood for like the first, I believe, 10 years of his life. I think Itachi's 4 years older than Sasuke, and he becomes an Anbu at 12, which means I think he does the Uchiha Massacre at 13. So first 9 years of Sasuke's life is pretty cool, actually. He's got a powerful dad, his mom loves him, his brother's a genius who he wants to play with, but is never really around, but he still adores. He gets 9 pretty good years. And then, you know, the Uchiha Massacre happens, which actually isn't that bad for Sasuke until the very end. See, Sasuke fortunately doesn't see the majority of the Uchiha Massacre. He gets back to the Uchiha village substantially deep into the Uchiha Massacre. And while he's got to like see the after effects of a clan-wide genocide, he doesn't necessarily have to hear the screams, which is a small consolation. On top of that, while he has to find his parents dead, he doesn't have to watch them die, which is also kind of good. And sure, he has to relive the killing of his parents in a Tsukiyomi for 72 hours, but like, it wasn't the real killing. Listen, it's bad. It's really bad, but it's worse for other people, kind of. Probably, yeah, it's worse for other people. And outside of the Uchiha Massacre, Sasuke's life isn't marred with that much devastation, as basically the only other sad thing that happens in Sasuke's life is the fact that he ends up killing Itachi in a battle. But in terms of the emotions that Sasuke would be feeling in that moment, it's kind of conflicting. See, here's the thing. After Sasuke wakes up after his battle with Itachi, he basically just assumes he's victorious, which means that Sasuke has finally achieved everything he's ever wanted to achieve in life. He's enacted the revenge he's always wanted, which is cool for him for like a couple of seconds. And then Obito starts talking, giving us the backstory on who Itachi was as a person and how Itachi was actually just keeping himself alive with medication so that he could die at the hands of Sasuke, meaning that Sasuke killing Itachi was not only what Itachi wanted, but also probably what Konoha would have wanted. And thus in this moment, Sasuke realizes that the real villain in all of this was Konoha, and more specifically Danzo. Now, Sasuke in this moment is too embridled with rage to feel any sorrow, but being conned into a lifelong revenge plot by your brother who's trying to make you more powerful so that you can kill them one day and get more powerful is sad. It's very sad, because in this moment Sasuke was essentially killing one of 3 people left on Earth who truly loved him. But note how I just said one of 3 people left on Earth who truly loved him, as at this moment both Naruto and Sakura would have dropped everything if Sasuke had come back. Now Kakashi probably less so. Kakashi was willing to kill Sasuke after he killed Danzo, and while Naruto said he was willing to kill Sasuke as well, let's be real, he probably wouldn't have. And because of that, it's kind of hard for me to put Sasuke higher on this list. He's always had a support system. The only real time where Sasuke didn't have a support system was between the Uchiha Massacre and the foundation of Team 7. So like 2 or 3 years of solitary confinement. But for the sheer fact that he had to see his entire clan massacred and relive the murder of his parents for 72 hours, yeah, he's got to be pretty high on this list. I just have a hard time saying that Itachi's death is that sad for him when we consider the fact that Itachi literally kept himself alive so that he could die at Sasuke's hands. But enough about orphans, right? Let's talk about people who actually had their parents. Kind of. Because coming up in 3rd place, we got Gaara. Yeah, I'm putting Gaara higher than Sasuke. Why, you ask? Well, because he had an active hand in pretty much everything bad that ever happened in his life. What do I mean? Oh, I don't know. How about the fact that Shukaku being sealed inside of Gaara while he was still inside of his pregnant mother is the reason his mother, who loved him more than anybody else on Earth ever would, died? I mean, his mother loved him so much that her soul moved into a jar of sand that would protect him for the rest of his life. It's kind of a daily walking reminder that the only person who will ever love you is now not only gone because of you, but is also sand, which means not only is her soul not resting in the Pure Lands, but is basically stuck in perpetual combat trying to stop her son from dying from a myriad of different projectiles. On top of this, because Gaara was the Jinchuriki of Shukaku, who nobody really likes in the Sand Village, as Shukaku had a long and complicated history of just being sealed away along with its Jinchuriki up until Gaara. The only real people that Gaara ever interfaced with were his father and his uncle. And one of those people is one of the worst people in the entire show, and the other, Gaara killed. See, Gaara did not have control of Shukaku, because Shukaku at this point of the story was incredibly evil, and thus every single time Gaara fell asleep, Shukaku would take over his body, and Rasa would have to suppress Shukaku using gold dust, which meant slowly but surely that Gaara did not end up being the perfect weapon his father wanted him to be. But Gaara didn't want to be a perfect weapon. Gaara wanted to be a regular boy. But since he was always falling asleep, accidentally hurting people with his sand, getting angry, having Shukaku take over his body, the entire village treated him with an insane amount of fear, which increased the isolation, making his uncle, who he didn't know was his uncle, the only person in his life who genuinely cared for him. But that didn't last for long, because when Rasa finally decided that Gaara couldn't be the perfect weapon, he sent his uncle to kill him, but Gaara's able to defend himself and kill his own uncle, who in his final breaths reveals to Gaara that he's related to him. So Gaara is now not only indirectly responsible for his mother's death, but also directly responsible for his uncle's. And while Gaara did still have Tamari and Kankuro, having no parents is better than having Rasa as your only parent. And thus, while Gaara does technically deal with a whole lot less in terms of loss than Sasuke, because he had an active hand in two of the most important deaths in his life and lived a tortured existence for the first 13 years of his life where he couldn't sleep lest he destroy his entire nation, yeah, I'm gonna have to say Gaara had it a little bit worse than Sasuke. But since we're talking about having an active hand in the death of your loved ones, let's talk about our number 2 spot, Kakashi. Kakashi's life is genuinely a series of unfortunate events. Kakashi was born an incredibly talented, genius-level child who flew through the Shinobi Academy. Now, this is mostly due to the fact that Kakashi's father was the White Fang of the Leaf, Sakumo Hatake, one of the most powerful shinobi the world had ever known. However, Kakashi, just like Gaara, lost his mother in childbirth, meaning that from the rip, Kakashi only had one parent that Kakashi idolized. However, one day after the Second Great Shinobi World War, Sakumo Hatake went on a mission. And during this mission, Sakumo Hatake had to make a decision between either saving his comrades' lives or completing the mission. And he chose his comrades, which turned the entirety of the village against his father. And thus Sakumo Hatake returned to the village in shame. And that shame eventually got to him as he went on to take his own life. And while, fortunately, Kakashi didn't have to watch him take his own life, he was the person who stumbled upon his father's corpse. And honestly, that's probably the least devastating thing that ever happened to Kakashi, because Kakashi would then go on to be saved by Obito, who he believed died saving him, would go on to try to protect Rin against 24 hidden mist Anbu members, and when Rin realized that if Kakashi continued fighting this fight, he would die, Rin thrust herself in front of Kakashi's Chidori, leading to Kakashi killing Rin. And while Kakashi wasn't directly responsible for Rin's death, in his mind, his lack of strength is the reason that Rin had to make this sacrifice. And thus, anytime Kakashi Chidori'd somebody in the chest, this moment of Rin's death would come flashing back to him. This moment is substantially more devastating for Kakashi than it is Obito. Obito just has to watch Rin die. Kakashi has to be the one to kill her against his will. And we know this moment haunts Kakashi because when he Chidori's Haku, he has a PTSD flashback. But the trauma doesn't end here. I mean, sure, he's lost his father, Obito, Rin, but what else could he possibly lose? Oh, I don't know. How about the only other person left on his team, Minato? You see, after Rin's death, Kakashi joins the Anbu at the volition of Minato, and he slowly but surely loses himself in the darkness of the assassinations, becoming known by many as simply a weapon. However, many years after Rin's death, when Minato eventually becomes the 4th Hokage, Hiruzen yanks Kakashi out of the Anbu and assigns him to protect Minato and Kushina, which is technically a role of the Anbu. However, on the night of Naruto's birth, Kakashi isn't able to protect either Minato or Kushina, as he's locked out of the battle by the adamantite chains and the words of Hiruzen. And thus, once again, Kakashi's lack of strength and his inability to enact change in Konoha leads to the death of one of his loved ones, this time it being Minato and Kushina. But the trauma doesn't stop there, because while Hiruzen was technically unable to stop Orochimaru after discovering his human laboratory, Kakashi was next up. And once again, Kakashi was too weak to stop Orochimaru. And then in the war arc, it gets revealed that Kakashi's best childhood friend is the guy orchestrating all of this. And then Kakashi has to have a long, incredible battle with him, befriend Obito, just in time to lose him again. And oh yeah, Kakashi's adult best friend, Might Guy, now permanently crippled and can't compete against Kakashi in basically anything. So yeah, he's been through a lot. More than basically everybody in the entire story. Except for, of course, our number 1 spot, Naruto. I'm kidding, it's Itachi.
Nick, what do you mean Naruto's not on this list?
Naruto's backstory is not that sad.
Oh, everybody hated him in the village.
No, they just didn't. Listen, we can be told that, absolutely, and sure, maybe in the first 10 or so episodes, everybody hated Naruto, but literally any flashback we get into Naruto's backstory is just him playing with Shikamaru, Choji, and the rest of the boys. And that's if you don't include filler characters like Yota. All the while, mind you, as a child who's being crushed on by Hinata. Yeah, he lost his parents. He never knew them. Yeah, he lived alone, but he still loved everybody. No, the person with the saddest backstory in all of Naruto is Itachi.
Oh, Nick, what do you mean? Kakashi lost way more people than Itachi did.
No, he simply didn't. Itachi not only loses Shisui, and I know in the anime and the manga, Shisui just falls back into the waterfall, but in the light novel that elaborates on this moment, Itachi has to kill Shisui. Shisui tells Itachi, I've been poisoned, but if you want to awaken your MS, you have to kill me. And so Itachi has to cut down Shisui, who then falls into the waterfall. Mind you, this is after he just watched the man pull out his last remaining eyeball and place it into a crow, while also telling him to not go and fight the guy who did this to him. And thus Itachi had to continue acting as a spy for the person who killed his only friend on Earth, a person he heavily idolized, so that a war wouldn't break out between his clan and his village. At like the age of 10, the entire balance of the village was thrust onto Itachi's shoulders. The Uchiha were stoked about the idea of him becoming the youngest ever Anbu, because it meant he could spy on the Hokage and learn the inner workings of Konoha. While Konoha, specifically Danzo, was stoked to have him be so trusted and loved in the Uchiha clan so that he could be privy to all of the information that they were talking about at their secret meetings. And thus in the end, Itachi has to kill his entire clan to save his baby brother. He has to cut down parents he loves. He has to put his girlfriend in a Tsukiyomi that plays out her entire life that she dies at the end of. And while sure he gets revenge against a couple of Uchihas who believed that he killed Shisui and a couple of people that forced his father into making hard political decisions, Itachi had to extinct his own clan at the age of 13 years old to save the one person he had left. He then had to become a villain to that one person so that one person would become strong enough to defend Konoha because he was no longer strong enough to do it. On top of that, he was riddled with a chakra disease that slowly but surely degenerated his body. He was forced to become a spy in one of the most vile organizations in the entire world, which put him into situations like his battle against Yagura, where he had to kill relatively innocent tailed beast Jinchuriki, all the while knowing that any connection he made in the Akatsuki wasn't real because he was spying on them. He then had to artificially prolong his own life after the overusage of his MS on account of him being a spy in the Akatsuki, so that one day his brother could kill him and steal his eyeballs. So you want to know why Itachi's backstory is sadder than Kakashi's? Kakashi's still alive. Kakashi becomes Hokage. Naruto becomes Hokage. Gaara becomes Kazekage. Itachi just dies in a broken down building in the middle of the woods. And while he's venerated as a hero of Konoha, he doesn't know that. So yes, Itachi has the saddest backstory in Naruto. I'm sorry, it's the objective truth. He was forced into a series of brutal positions relatively against his own will. So for the sheer amount of emotional trauma that would inflict on somebody, yes, I genuinely believe Itachi should take the #1 spot. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Is there anybody not on this list you believe should have been? And do you agree with where I placed those who are already on the list? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell.
Oh, Nick, what about Madara?
Yeah, Madara's backstory is sad, but so is everybody's in the Warring States period. People died.